Perfect Cell, Vegeta, Itachi Uchiha, Pain, Meruem, Sesshomaru, and Ganondorf. More often than not, I find myself relating to the bad guys, at least in some capacity, and these are a few good examples of that. Welcome back to the channel. This is the second video in my video game psychology series. And in this video, I'm going to go over Ocarina of Time, and more specifically, Ganondorf and his psychology. And I think Ganondorf perfectly represents the psychology of resentment. And I'm going to go into this a little bit, right? Let's talk about the backstory of Ganondorf and why resentment and Carl Jung's philosophy of the shadow fits so perfectly with this character, right? So Ganondorf comes from a harsh environment on the edge of the desert where his people are marginalized, and he seeks to do everything in his power to give them a better life. And just to the east of Gerudo Desert, his homeland and his people's homeland, is the Kingdom of Hyrule, right? A prosperous nation that just got over a bitter conflict, right? The climate in Hyrule is much more desirable than that of the Gerudo Desert, right? And Hyrule overall is just much more prosperous. And Ganondorf sees this, and he wishes this for his own people, right? He kind of resents the fact that Hyrule is so wealthy and prosperous while his people suffer, essentially banished to the desert, right? So he comes up with a plot to overthrow the king by feigning his loyalty. And the reason he does this is actually pretty understandable. I think we've all experienced at some point in our lives some hardship, and we want to be able to provide for the ones that we love and the ones that we care about. And sometimes we do whatever we have to make that happen, right? I know for myself, right, I've taken a job, and I still have this job to this day, with a company that I don't necessarily align with, in any way. But I took the job because of the money, right? At the end of the day, and the wealth that it would provide me. And yeah, so over the years my wealth has increased exponentially, but I don't really like this job. But at the end of the day, I took it to provide for my family, and in that sense we can all relate to Ganondorf. Not to that extreme of an extent, but really in his situation, that was the only thing that he essentially could do to help the Gerudo. And honestly, coming from that perspective, I understand him completely. And I feel like as I grow older into my 30s, right? I'm in my mid 30s now. I can relate so much more to the bad guys, the quote unquote bad guys of in anime or games or movies or whatever it will be. Just because I've gained a broader perspective, and a lot of times their motives actually make pretty good sense, right? Even though the way they go about them are honestly, pretty unjust. And when it comes to Ganondorf specifically, he does a lot of messed up stuff. In particular, his attack on Hyrule Castle Town, where he just levels the whole thing and turns everybody into re-dead, kind of undead nightmares, roaming the streets purposely. So another aspect of Ganondorf's psychology I wanted to touch on is repressed emotions and aggression and feeling of powerlessness, right? I think Ganondorf's emotions manifested in a way that they did, right? This sheer aggression. It's because he never wanted to feel powerless again, right? He never wanted to feel that powerlessness of not being able to do anything for his people. So to really put an end to this, after he, uses Link and enters the sacred realm and gains the Triforce of Power, he goes on a complete assault of Hyrule Castle, overthrows the king, and wipes everybody out, forcing those remaining to either flee and become refugees in Kakariko Village, or just to ultimately meet their fate. And at the end of the day, you could say that he accomplished his task of doing just that, right? I think in Ganondorf's situation, I think that anger kind of became a protective barrier, a protective emotion to protect him from feelings of just humiliation and inadequacy that he was feeling for not being able to, protect and provide for his people and his tribe. And when it comes to weaving in some real world psychology with Ganondorf, I want to touch on Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, his concept of the shadow. Now, with Carl Jung's shadow, it's really the part of us that represents, repressed emotions, anger, resentment, jealousy, sexual impulses, desire for power and selfishness, fear, and all these traits that we suppress, right? And in a way, Ganondorf is kind of like Hyrule itself's shadow. Ganondorf represents all these things that are repressed by Hyrulean society and ultimately things that just don't want to be acknowledged by the kingdom. One of his basic ideas for the shadow is that what we refuse to acknowledge doesn't disappear, becomes unconscious, and can eventually control us. And I think that that perfectly represents Ganondorf, right? I mean, with the Hyrulean society, he essentially is, and he's a leader of his tribe, but he's essentially an outcast, and he's forced to give his loyalty to the king, pretty much against his will, in exchange for a little bit of acknowledgement. And because Ganondorf never felt acknowledged and wasn't acknowledged by the king and Hyrulean society at large, he resents them, and he eventually ends up, as we know, taking over Hyrule and essentially usurping the king and completely devastating the region, and goes about dominating the society for 7 years while Link slumbers and awaits his awakening after drawing the Master Sword. But at the end of the day, Ganondorf's story is also the story of the tragedy of resentment, right? At the end of the day, he stops being somebody experiencing injustice and ends up doing injustice onto others and, making others pay for what he experienced in his formative years and even as an adult, which really goes into the dangers of resentment building and what resentment can do in our own lives, right? Whether it be in a relationship, at work, maybe you dislike your boss or you dislike your employer, and you feel that they're, doing you dirty, right? And you want to get back at them somehow, in some way. And you start plotting on how to do so. But sometimes it's in our best interest to not act out of that resentment and not try to seek revenge. Because when we do, sometimes we cross a line that we can't necessarily come back from. And essentially, when we seek out revenge, sometimes we end up hurting others in ways that we don't expect. And even at some point, just like Ganondorf, we stop being this person experiencing injustice, and we become the person doing injustices onto others to make up for what we've experienced. So important to try to process these emotions, because when you don't, it can lead to horrible things, and we see that all throughout media and stories, and especially within the Ocarina of Time, it's a prime example of what can happen, and how these feelings of resentment and the need for power, the need to overcome his enemies, did to Ganondorf once he invaded the Sacred Realm and achieved power, essentially. All right, guys, these have been my thoughts on the psychology of Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time. At the end of the day, his motives do make a lot of sense, right? But it's important to apply this to our own lives and to really be careful about how we deal with, feelings of resentment, anger, and powerlessness, and the way we go about seeking justice for things that we perceive as having been done on us, and the implications and ramifications those can hold if we don't channel those feelings in a proper way. And I think I deal with this a lot personally. I know a lot of people do. So yeah, please just be mindful of that. But anyways, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you. I appreciate you. Drop a like. It helps these videos get seen. And if you like my Psychology of Game series, don't worry. There's going to be more coming down the pipeline. I have another one planned. I've got a bunch more Ocarina stuff and a few more top 10s and tier lists coming your way. Please do consider subscribing. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs by the end of the summer, which I think is September 21st. So we're doing pretty good. I think we're on track to meet the goal, and I appreciate each and every one of you guys that subscribe. I love just chatting up with you guys in the comments and talking about Zelda and psychology and just things that happen in life. So All right, guys. Stay tuned for more as usual. And until next time, this has been Matt from Top Tier. I'm out. Bye.